The phone rang at 2 a.m., a shrill cry slicing through the silence of my empty house. My wife, Clara, was 3,000 miles away, tending to her dying mother in California, and I was alone in our Connecticut home, drowning in a sea of unwashed dishes and unspoken fears. That night, the call wasn't from her. It was about my cousin, Ethan, and it changed everything. I hadn't seen Ethan in years, not since our awkward teenage summers at Grandma's lake house, where we'd fish and bicker like brothers. Back then, I knew he was different, though I never had the words for it. He'd come out as gay in his 20s, and while I nodded and said the right things, I kept my distance, unsure how to bridge the gap between us. But when his mother, my Aunt Linda, called in tears, saying Ethan had been attacked outside a bar in Hartford, something in me snapped. "He's in the hospital, James," she sobbed. "He's asking for you." I drove through the night, the headlights cutting through fog as thick as my guilt. Ethan had always been there for me. When I flunked algebra, when I got my heart broken at 16, when I doubted I'd ever be good enough for Clara. Now, he needed me, and I'd been too wrapped up in my own life to even call him. The hospital was a maze of sterile white walls and beeping machines. Ethan lay in a bed, his face bruised, one eye swollen shut, but his smile, God, that crooked, defiant smile, still lit up the room. "Took you long enough, Jimmy," he rasped, and I felt my throat tighten. He'd been jumped by 3 guys outside a gay bar. He told me later, his voice steady but his hands trembling. They called him names I won't repeat, thrown punches, and left him bleeding on the pavement. The police had taken statements, but Ethan didn't trust they'd do much. "Just another night in paradise," he joked, but his eyes betrayed the hurt. I sat by his bed, listening, feeling useless. "You don't have to stay," he said, but I did. I couldn't leave him there, not like that. The next morning, I brought him to my place to recover. Clara was still gone, and the house felt too big, too quiet. Ethan filled it with his laughter, his sarcastic quips, and the way he'd hum old jazz tunes while making coffee. He moved gingerly, wincing from cracked ribs, but he refused to act like a victim. "I've had worse," he said, brushing off my concern. But I saw the shadows in his eyes, the way he'd flinch at sudden noises. I wanted to fix it, to make him feel safe, but I didn't know how. Over the next few days, we fell into a rhythm. I'd cook breakfast, burnt toast and eggs, because I'm hopeless in the kitchen, and he'd tease me mercilessly. We'd watch old movies, argue about politics, and talk about everything except the attack. One night, over cheap wine, he opened up about his life. The boyfriends who'd come and gone, the family who loved him but didn't always understand, the constant tightrope of being himself in a world that wasn't always kind. I really listened for the first time. I saw Ethan not as my quirky cousin, but as a man who'd fought battles I'd never had to face. Then came the night by the lake. We'd driven out to Grandma's old place, now abandoned, just to get out of the house. The air was crisp, the stars sharp against the sky. We sat on the dock, sharing a blanket, the silence between us heavy with something unspoken. "You ever feel like you're hiding who you are?" he asked, his voice soft. I thought of Clara, of the perfect life we'd built, and the cracks I'd ignored, my doubts, my fears, the way I'd buried parts of myself to fit the mold of husband, provider, and normal. I didn't answer, but my hand found his, and, for a moment, the world felt still. That touch lingered, a spark I didn't expect. Ethan looked at me, his blue eyes searching, and I felt my heart race in a way I hadn't since I was a kid. It wasn't just gratitude or pity. It was something deeper, something I couldn't name. I pulled away, my mind a mess of guilt and confusion. He was my cousin, my friend, and I was married. But as we drove back in silence, I knew something had shifted. Ethan wasn't just the guy who'd helped me through tough times. He was the one who saw me, really saw me, when I'd forgotten how to see myself. The days after the lake were a blur of tension and avoidance. Ethan stayed at my house, his presence both a comfort and a challenge. I catch myself watching him, his easy laugh, the way he'd tuck a stray curl behind his ear, and then I'd look away, ashamed of the warmth spreading through me. Clara called every night, her voice tired but steady, updating me on her mother's condition. I'd nod, say I loved her, and mean it, but the words fell hollow. Something was unraveling, and I didn't know how to stop it. Ethan noticed. Of course he did. Always been the one to call me out, even when we were kids. One morning, as I fumbled with the coffee maker, he leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You're acting weird, Jimmy," he said, his tone light, but his eyes sharp. "What's going on in that head of yours?" I muttered something about work stress, but he didn't buy it. He never did. Instead, he changed the subject, suggesting we fix up the old shed in the backyard, a project to keep us busy. I agreed, desperate for a distraction. We spent hours hauling wood, hammering nails, and painting the shed a bright, hopeful blue. It was grunt work, but it felt good to build something with our hands. Ethan's strength surprised me. Despite his injuries, he worked harder than I did, his focus unwavering. We'd talk, laugh, and sometimes fall into a comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. But every brush of his arm against mine, every shared glance, sent my pulse racing. I told myself it was nothing, just the stress of Clara's absence, but deep down I knew better. One afternoon, as we sat on the grass, sweaty and covered in paint, Ethan handed me a beer and said, "You don't have to figure it all out today, you know." His voice was gentle, but it cut through me. I wanted to ask what he meant, but I was afraid of the answer. Instead, I nodded, and we sat there, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire. That night, I dreamed of the lake again, of his hand in mine, and woke up with a knot in my chest. Clara's calls grew less frequent as her mother's condition worsened. I felt her slipping away, not because she loved me less, but because life was pulling us in different directions. Ethan, meanwhile, was a constant, cooking dinner, fixing the leaky faucet, filling the house with his warmth. One evening, he found me staring at an old photo of Clara and me on our wedding day. "You miss her," he said, not a question. I nodded, but the truth was messy. I missed her, but I was also terrified of what I felt for him. The turning point came when Ethan got a call from the police. They'd caught one of the guys who'd attacked him, but the others were still out there. I saw the fear flicker across his face, quickly masked by a forced smile. "Guess I'll have to watch my back," he said, but his voice shook. I wanted to protect him, to make the world safe for him, but all I could do was offer my home, my time, my presence. That night, he had a nightmare, thrashing and crying out in his sleep. I sat on the edge of his bed, whispering that he was safe, until he calmed. His hand gripped mine, and I didn't pull away. The next day, we went back to the lake house. It was becoming our refuge, a place where the world's rules felt softer. We swam in the cold water, laughing like kids, and later, as we dried off on the dock, Ethan told me about his first love, a boy from college who'd broken his heart. "I thought I'd never get over it," he said, his voice raw. "But I learned you don't have to stop loving someone to move forward." His words hit me hard, stirring questions I wasn't ready to answer. When our eyes met, the air felt charged, like a storm about to break. That night, as we sat by a small fire, Ethan leaned closer, his shoulder brushing mine. "You're allowed to feel what you feel, James," he said quietly. My heart pounded, torn between fear and longing. I wanted to say something, to tell him he was wrong, that I was straight, that I loved my wife. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I leaned into him just for a moment and felt the world shift again. The fire's embers glowed, casting shadows on Ethan's face as we sat in silence. My mind was a battlefield, loyalty to Clara clashing with the pull I felt toward him. I stood abruptly, muttering about needing sleep, and fled to the house. Ethan didn't follow, but his gaze lingered, heavy with understanding. Back home, I avoided him for days, burying myself in work, pretending the moment by the fire hadn't happened. But every time I saw him, laughing at a bad joke, reading on the couch, existing so effortlessly in my space, the truth grew harder to ignore. Clara called to say she'd be staying in California another month. Her mother was stable, but not improving, and she needed to be there. "I'm sorry, James," she said, her voice cracking. I feel like I'm abandoning you. I told her it was okay, that I understood, but the distance between us wasn't just physical anymore. I hung up and found Ethan in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. You okay? He asked, not looking up. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. We fell back into our routine, but the air was different now, charged with unspoken questions. One night, after too many beers, I blurted out, "Why do you make this so hard?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, his knife pausing mid-chop. "Make what hard?" he asked, but his tone said he knew. I couldn't answer, not directly. Instead, I asked about his life, his dreams, anything to shift the focus. He talked about wanting to open a bookstore, a place where people could feel safe, seen. His passion was infectious, and for a moment, I forgot my confusion, lost in the light in his eyes. But the world wasn't done testing us. A week later, Ethan got another call from the police. The second attacker had been identified, but the third was still at large. Ethan tried to shrug it off, but I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands shook as he hung up. "I'm fine," he insisted, but I wasn't. Rage boiled in me, not just at the men who'd hurt him, but at a world that made him a target. I wanted to fix it, to shield him, but all I could do was be there. We went back to the lake house, our sanctuary. This time, we didn't swim or laugh. We sat on the dock, the water still as glass, and Ethan told me about the fear he carried every day, the glances, the whispers, the threat of violence. "You get used to it," he said, but his voice broke. I reached for his hand, my heart pounding. "You shouldn't have to," I said and meant it. His fingers tightened around mine, and for the first time I didn't pull away. That night, we talked until dawn about his life, my marriage, the things we'd both buried. I admitted I'd always felt different too, though I'd never named it. Growing up, I'd pushed down feelings I didn't understand, chasing the life I thought I was supposed to want. Ethan listened, his eyes soft, and when I finished, he said, "You don't have to be anyone but you, James." Those words broke something in me, a dam I'd built to keep myself safe. I leaned forward, and before I could think, my lips brushed his. The kiss was brief, tentative, but set my world on fire. I pulled back, panic flooding me. "I'm sorry," I stammered, but Ethan just smiled, sad and knowing. "Don't be," he said. "Just figure out what you want." I couldn't sleep that night, torn between guilt and a longing I couldn't deny. Ethan was my cousin, my friend, but he was also the person who made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. I love Clara, but this was something else, something I didn't know how to name. The next morning, Ethan acted like nothing had happened, but I saw the hope in his eyes, the fear that I'd pull away again. I wanted to tell him I was sorry, that it was a mistake, but the words felt like a lie. Instead, I helped him pack for a trip to visit his mom, promising to check in. As he drove away, I stood in the driveway, my heart a tangled mess of love, fear, and possibility. Ethan's absence left the house hollow, a mirror of the emptiness I felt inside. I threw myself into work, into routine, trying to drown out the memory of that kiss. But every quiet moment brought it back. The warmth of his lips, the way my heart had raced, the truth I'd spent years avoiding. Clara's calls were brief now, her voice strained with exhaustion. I wanted to tell her everything, to confess and beg for clarity, but I couldn't. Not yet. When Ethan returned a week later, he looked better. His bruises faded, his smile brighter. But there was a distance between us, a careful space he maintained. "You don't have to decide anything," he said one night, as we sat on the porch. "But you can't keep running from it." His words stung because he was right. I'd spent my life running, from feelings, from questions for myself. I wanted to be the man Clara married, the man who had it all together, but that man felt like a stranger now. We went back to the lake house, unable to resist its pull. This time, we brought a bottle of whiskey and a deck of cards, playing gin rummy under the stars. The game was an excuse to talk, to laugh, to let the tension ease. But as the night wore on, the air grew heavy again. "What are we doing, Ethan?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He set down his cards, his eyes locking on mine. "We're being honest," he said. "For once." I told him about my marriage, how Clara and I had built a life, but how I'd always felt like I was playing a role. I told him about the feelings I'd buried, the ones that surfaced when I was with him. He listened, his face unreadable, and when I finished, he said, "You're not alone in this, James. But you have to choose." I wanted to choose him, to choose myself, but the weight of my vows, my life, held me back. The next day, we got news that the third attacker had been arrested. Ethan's relief was palpable, but it came with a new fear. He was ready to move on, to rebuild, but he wasn't sure where I fit in. "I can't be your experiment," he said, his voice firm but kind. "I love you, James, but I won't wait forever." His words hit like a punch because I knew he meant it. I loved him too, in a way I hadn't thought possible, but I was still married, still tied to a life I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. Clara came home a week later. The house felt alive again, but I was a ghost in it. She said something was wrong, but I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Ethan moved back to his apartment, leaving a void I couldn't fill. We texted, called, met for coffee, but every moment with him was a reminder of what I'd felt, what I'd lost. One night, I drove to his place, my heart pounding. "I don't know what I'm doing," I admitted, standing in his doorway. He pulled me inside, and we talked until morning about love, about fear, about the courage it takes to be true. I knew I had to talk to Clara. The next evening, I sat her down, my hands shaking. I told her about Ethan, about the feelings I discovered, about the man I was trying to become. She listened, her face pale, her eyes wet with tears. "I love you, James," she said, "but I can't share you." We cried together, holding each other, knowing our marriage was over, but our love wasn't. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was honest. Clara moved out the next week, taking half our life with her. The house was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt like a blank page. Ethan and I started over, not as cousins, not as friends, but as something new, something fragile and real. We took it slow, navigating the mess of family reactions and my own self-discovery. Aunt Linda was shocked but supportive. Others were less kind, but we faced it together. We spent weekends at the lake house, rebuilding it as our own. Each nail we hammered, each wall we painted felt like a step towards something true. Ethan opened his bookstore, a cozy place filled with stories and acceptance. And I found work as a counselor, helping others find their way. We weren't perfect. There were fights, doubts, moments when the world's judgment stung, but we were honest. One evening, as we sat on the dock, the same dock where it all began, Ethan took my hand. "You're braver than you think," he said, his smile soft. I kissed him, not with fear or guilt, but with love for him, for myself, for the life we were building. The stars above us felt like a promise, a reminder that truth, however hard one, was worth it. Looking back, I see the journey, Ethan's courage, my awakening, the pain and beauty of letting go. Clara found her own path, and we stayed friends, bound by respect and shared history. Ethan and I grew stronger, not because we were flawless, but because we chose each other every day. The world didn't always understand, but we did. And that was enough.